And so I can understand how young men would get very frustrated and burned out if their choices are, well, I can be a weak, passive pastor who's afraid of standing up to his own wife or the women in the congregation, or I can be Andrew Tate. And those seem to be my two
Right,
options for
right,
getting married.
right. Right. Yeah. Well, let me go back to the women's issue and just say one more thing about that, and then
Oh,
talk
please.
about Tate and Peterson and that kind of thing. So yeah, so churches obviously do need to address the sins of women. I mean that's something that we have failed to do. So pastors are culpable in that. And I, like, having been a pastor for about 30 years now, or in pastoral ministry for about 30 years, and knowing a lot of pastors and talking to a lot of pastors and hearing a lot of pastors preach and whatnot, I can tell you that pastors are pastors are fearless when it comes to critiquing men and pointing out men's characteristic sins, but they are very cowardly and fearful when it comes to pointing out the characteristic sins of women. And so that is a huge issue. And that kind of feeds into this idea. I think there's actually a lot of arrogance on the part of women who really don't understand their own nature very well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you've read the book. It's a recent book, Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale, that it's gotten a lot of attention recently. Very interesting book, really well done, very well researched. I was not at all impressed with the criticisms of it. I think it's a really good book. But she has a chapter in there on basically how the Me Too movement impacted the church. Mm-hmm. And she starts out the chapter talking about this Christian comedian, John Crist, who was got really popular and then had some sexually inappropriate relationships with women. And then when the story broke, the way that it broke is that Christ is some kind of sexual pervert and these women are victims. But and Meg Basham did a really good job basically showing that there's actually no indication at all that any of these women were victims. They were all of age. There wasn't even really any kind of power differential per se between Christ and these women that he had inappropriate relationships with. But the narrative, it's just taken for granted that the man has acted sinfully and the women are innocent victims. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think it was Julie Royce the other day, who's kind of been a thorn in the side, kind of a constant critic of people like John MacArthur and some other big shots in the evangelical world. But basically she said something like, if there's any kind of power differential at all, then there can't be, in some kind of, sexual issue, if there's any kind of power differential, it's impossible to give consent.
That's right.
And so basically, because men always have more power, it's almost like saying women can't sin sexually. I mean, that's really the implication of that. And that is absolutely insane. So yes, you're right. We need to confront women about their sins, whether it's the immodesty of the Proverbs 7 type woman or wives who do not want to be submissive and have maybe heard sermons that so redefine submission that it doesn't mean anything. Okay. Mm-hmm. So they hear that and then they latch onto that and think, well, this is great. Submission doesn't really mean submission. Okay. Mm-hmm. No, it does mean submission. That's right. It means obedience is a word that's used. It means obedience. You do need to obey your husband. And women don't like to hear those things, but they need to hear those things. They need to be told that they're responsible for keeping their emotions in check. If for men have to learn to control their desires, that's your most basic issue. Women have to learn how to control their emotions. They have to learn emotional self-control and emotional discipline. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you get to let your emotions run free. And you'll hear people say things like, well, shouldn't every emotion be validated? No, it should not be. That very idea comes from the pit of hell. Okay. Mm-hmm. Your emotions, just like the rest of you, your emotions need to obey Jesus. Your emotions need to bow before Jesus and submit to the law of God and the word of God, period. So we've done women a huge disservice, I think, by not confronting their sins and dealing with them and discipling them and pointing out what those characteristic sins are. Everybody knows the characteristic sins of men, but we're kind of oblivious to the characteristic sins of women, and that's a problem. Now, you asked about Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, that kind of thing. Like, what sort of models do men have? And here is where we really see the result of the church failing to speak with clarity in these areas, is that a lot of men now go outside of the church to get their training, their teaching, basically their view of what manhood is. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, if you start Googling about manhood, you'll end up with a Jordan Peterson, or you'll end up with an Andrew Tate or a Rollo Tomasi. And I mean, Peterson is not a believer, but he's definitely more benign than those other names. I mean, he's not, he's, I'll just say he's closer to the kingdom than those other men. But, guys like Rollo Tomasi or Andrew Tate, I mean, they're going to send you down a very different path. If that's who you start to take your cues from when it comes to understanding manhood. And the thing that's really dangerous about it is that there are some really significant things that they get right that so much of the church has gotten wrong. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The church has actually, this is one of the ways the church, I think, has really misled men and failed men, is the church has taught men a lot of things about the male-female relationship that are simply wrong. I mean, I remember when I was in youth group, like in 6th grade. Okay. So like I'm at that age where you're just first starting to notice girls and get interested and that kind of thing. And, I grew up going to big public schools and that kind of thing. But I remember, I was in like 6th grade and my youth pastor said, he's doing kind of the typical relationship talk, for young guys. And he basically says, what a female is really going to want from you is for you to be kind, caring, sensitive. And I remember thinking to myself, no, from what I've observed in the hallways at school, what they really want is the quarterback of the football team.
Mm-hmm. That's
It's
right.
like, it did not make sense to me then. And I just remember thinking, that just doesn't really sound, that doesn't hold. Like I had heard girls talk, like I knew how they talked about guys, and I was like, I don't think that's right. I mean, obviously, men do need to be kind, and I mean, there's some truth in that. It's not totally false, but what men need to understand is what actually generates attraction with a woman, and it's not those things. Okay, now you don't have to be the Andrew Tate, I mean, people would say, oh, that's alpha masculinity. I would say no, that's kind of a caricature of masculinity. You don't have to drive a Lamborghini and make $1 million a year to be attractive either. You do have to be a man who is oriented towards dominion, a man who has skills and competencies. Okay, I mean every man should aspire to be a human Swiss Army knife. Okay, that should be the goal. I always think of David in 1 Samuel 16. He's a young man, and he catches the eye of some of Saul's servants, and they give this list of this descriptive list of David and his qualities and accomplishments, even as a young man. And, he's a mighty warrior, and his speech is seasoned with wisdom, and he's a skillful musician. And I start to think, well, how did this guy accomplish so much at such a young age? But that should be what men aspire to, is you should aspire to, you should develop yourself physically, spiritually, and I would just say vocationally. There's a lot of words you can put in that third slot, but I'll just say vocation. But the only way for you to develop yourself vocationally is to learn skills. Okay, so think in terms of the dominion mandate. Everything goes back to the creation mandate in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 frames what life is all about. And if I were talking to women, I would say different things about the creation mandate than what I will say here, because we're speaking mainly to a masculine audience here, a male audience here. But think about this. The creation mandate in Genesis 1 basically breaks down into two categories. You have take dominion, rule, subdue the earth. So you've got the dominion part of it, and then you've got be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. You've got the multiplication part of it. So it's dominion and multiplication. Those are the two categories. Okay. Now, the book of Proverbs is all about how to fulfill, how a man fulfills the creation mandate in a fallen world. So the book of Proverbs is basically about a man's work and a man's wife. Okay, here's what your work should look like. There's a whole lot in Proverbs about that. And then here's what here's the kind of woman you should not pursue. Here's the kind of woman you should pursue. Shun harlot folly, pursue lady wisdom. And then at the end of the book, you marry her and she becomes your queen. Okay, so Proverbs is about fulfilling the creation mandate in a fallen world. Okay, so what it means to pursue dominion and what it means to pursue a woman in a fallen world. Okay. So that's what life is about for men. So in order to do those things, what do you need? Well, you've got to realize, and I also point this out, God gave Adam a job, a vocation, before he gave Adam a wife. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
Adam was commanded to tend and guard the garden before he's given a wife. Okay. Tending to the garden, that will make him, that's a form of productivity. That's a form of provision. Okay. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to be a provider. Guarding the garden, you're going to be a protector. That's the other side of your masculinity. Protect and provide. That's the mantra of masculinity. It's right there in Genesis 2. Okay. So I think to be a man who can be attractive to a woman so that you can pursue a woman successfully, that's what you've got to do. That's what you've got to figure out is how can I be a protector and provider? So being a provider in our world is going to mean developing a set of skills that have value in the marketplace. Okay. And the more skills you can accumulate, the more value you have. Okay. So you should be, we talk about being a high value man, but that's really what that ought to mean. And then being a protector. Okay. The best protector is going to be somebody who's, basically physically fit, who makes the most of himself physically. He's going to develop himself physically. And that's really important too. Okay. There's other skills and whatnot that can come with that also, but you get the picture. Okay. So that's what it takes. So again, you don't have to drive the Lamborghini or make $1 million. Okay. Now I do think there's one other aspect to this when it comes to men who want to get married and sort of what you're up against. Women today they have more unrealistic standards and expectations than ever before. Okay. Some of that is because of the sexual revolution and promiscuity. And they might think that, a guy that would never consider marrying them might sleep with them. And they think, oh, well, I should be able to get a guy like that as my husband when really, right. He would have no interest in marrying her. So, there's what the red pill guys call the alpha widow. That's a real thing. And that's one of the reasons why the sexual revolution has been so destructive. Okay. There's also what's called hypergamy, which is the idea that a woman wants to marry up. She wants to marry somebody who is superior to her because she was built to submit to him. She was made to be in submission to him. So she wants to marry somebody who she deems as worthy of submission. And I always tell people, and I kind of pick this up from C.S. Lewis, headship and respect are not just practical necessities in marriage to make the marriage work in a peaceful, functional way. They are erotic and romantic necessities as well. Okay. Mm-hmm. She's not going to be attracted to a man she doesn't respect. So she's got to respect you. Okay. But the problem is today a man is not, it used to be, again, 50 years ago, you're sort of competing with the other men in your hometown for all the ladies there. Okay. Well, now you're competing with, millions of other men across the whole planet on dating apps and whatnot. So the competition, so to speak, is a whole lot more difficult. Okay. Now, again, I think in Christian circles, we can rein a lot of that in. Okay. Because, I'm not saying nobody should ever do online dating. I know people have found their spouse that way and it's turned out really well. But I do think that, that women need to be realistic in their expectations. And oftentimes today they're not. And so this is another thing that young men are up against. And it's very, very difficult. How do you compete with every single man, across the world, with a dating profile? Just very, very difficult to do. So those are things that men have to recognize. So, men should treat life like a video game and keep leveling up, work on yourself, become the best possible version of yourself, the best possible version that you can be by the grace of God. If grace restores nature, the gospel is going to make you more of a man, not less of a man. It's going to make you more masculine, not less. Okay. Not toxically masculine, but genuinely masculine. Okay. And then, come to, understand female nature. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, and I told the youth pastor story. The other thing that was kind of a trope among young men, when I was growing up is that, women just can't be understood. They're forever a mystery and it's a riddle wrapped in enigma, and you're never going to understand women. And I remember, reading when I was, this before I was married, 1 Peter chapter 3, and Peter says, live with your wife in an understanding way. In other words, you've got to understand your wife. And I remember thinking, that's really interesting. Like, what does it mean to understand her? Okay. And I came to the realization over time that, there are certain things that can be understood about women. You're not going to understand everything. Proverbs 30 talks about how The way of a man with a maiden is a mystery. Okay, it's one of those unexplainable things. So there's you're never going to eliminate the mystery, but you can understand women. You can understand your wife. You can understand that girl that you want to pursue and make your wife. There are certain things about her as a woman that you can understand, and if you do understand those things, it will greatly help you in your pursuit of her. And I think a lot of men just don't understand female nature well. And again, these are things that used to just be passed on, I think, from father to son. There's kind of a folk wisdom just passed along. Things that just kind of everybody picks up and absorbs along the way. And again, that cycle got broken. Somewhere that passing of the baton got lost, I think, because of the sexual revolution and just the confusion brought on by separating sex from marriage and God's design and all of that. And so men are having to relearn that in our day, and that's where we are.